night sky, trying to take pictures of the Southern Cross, that sort of thing. I was still dismayed to find out that I couldn't see anything on the horizon. And quite frankly, I'm not sure I can even now. But we should be approaching here soon. At 25 knots, we should be basically in there within the next half hour. For what it's worth, the sun's trying to break through, but that's in the opposite direction as the city and the coast. So I have to take different shots from different angles in order to tell you about it. If there was ever a time for me to feel self-conscious talking to you, this would be it. People are starting to congregate up here on 12 Forward, and there's not much to see at the moment. So there are people around, and there's nothing to point out to you, and yet here I am still talking. If that doesn't make me feel silly, nothing will. I may be trying to get used to doing this, telling you about all the things that I'm seeing and doing, but this is where it gets a little bit weird and uncomfortable, and I'm still not accustomed to it at all. I don't know what you can see at the moment. It's barely visible to me, so I'm afraid the camera's not picking up much, but it is right behind me. Somebody just walked past me saying, "I do believe I see land." And yes, it's there. You just have to squint a little bit, but we're getting there. At this point, I'd like to say there's no question about seeing land over my shoulder, but it's when I'm looking at it in the viewfinder, I'm not really seeing it. The sun is shining off of a large cliff face, which should be right where these people are standing. I think that basically divides Syndey Harbour from Botany Bay, but when I'm just looking at it from here, I really couldn't tell you. Botany Bay would be in this direction, Syndey Harbour in this direction. But since I've not been here before, that's really not for me to say. I've asked a few people, and they're just as clueless as I am. Not everybody's been here before, and fortunately I'm not alone in that. It turns out what I thought was the entrance to Botany Bay is the entrance to Syndey Harbour. Botany Bay is way down there, and you can't even see it from here. But this is where we're headed. The city is starting to come into view. It's getting a little crowded around here, not to mention we still have to deal with the wind. Fortunately, the CBD is to the south, so I might get just as good a shot from the balcony, which has the added advantage of not having this crowd and the self-consciousness of being amongst them. So I think I'm going to retreat to there. Yes, this is better. Less wind, fewer crowds, and you can see the cliffs again. Not so much the city quite yet, but we're still getting there. It is fairly slow progress. We're moving at about 17 knots, and we will probably slow down as we get closer, since we don't want to create too much of a wake. There are still fishermen and other things going on here in the bay. And as we're a big ship, we can cause big problems for those who are already here. So we have to move gently, which means I'm not going to be filming all the way through because it's a very long trip, relatively speaking, in terms of just holding the camera and talking. In terms of all the miles that we've traveled, not so much, but half an hour of this might get to be a bit of a drag for you. So I'm going to be cutting in and out as we go along and showing you the main sights that I see from here as we do. Again, I can see the residential area behind me, or at least what looks like a residential area, but given the lighting, I'm not sure that you've got a good glimpse of it here as we're coming through. But we're definitely seeing land, we're seeing a city. The cliffs in particular something. And all this is part of what they refer to as Greater Sydney, which in some places looks practically uninhabited, and then you see the big buildings way off in the vague distance. It's there, but like, where does the city begin and end? And as I understand it, it's all the city. Or rather, it's all Greater Sydney. The city, we have a ways to go before we get there. As with the rest of the buildings, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a pilot boat ahead of us, directing us to where we need to go. So we're about to make a turn to the port side, which means I'm not going to be able to see quite as much of the city as I thought I was. However, I still know that the CBD is going to be to our south, and once we get there, I'll be able to see it from the balcony. We still have a long way to go before we see the iconic landmarks that everybody thinks of as Sydney. The Harbour Bridge, the Opera House, and the like. You can see, or at least I think you can see because I'm staring into the sun, the grand sweep of the downtown business district and the like over my shoulder. I never get tired of seeing new and different cities, even though to a certain extent they all kind of look the same. There's this cluster of gigantic skyscrapers. They all have their distinct profiles, even if I don't know what all the different pieces are. And it's still fascinating to watch as we come in, even as, since we're turning, they're disappearing behind the ship. Bear in mind that everything behind me is all part of Greater Sydney. And as you can see, there's a lot of space here. There are a lot of buildings. There is a lot going on. This literally covers a lot of ground. I know that even though we're here until midnight, which is later than most places, we're never going to get a full idea of what Sydney is like. Then again, I sometimes wonder if I ever get a full idea of what Chicago is like back at home. We've got ferries coming alongside of us and apparently trying to get in front of us. Better hurry. And now the boat takes a swing to the starboard, and you should be able to see a little bit more of the city proper. It's hard for me to see when I'm looking through the viewfinder. This should be the Sydney that we all think of in our mind's eye. This is the central business district behind me, the CBD they call it. Yeah, very original, but it works. And you should be able to see the Opera House even over my shoulder. We are, in fact, here. This is the Sydney that we all think of when the name comes to our mind. You might be able to see right behind the Opera House that there's another cruise ship, which is probably why we'll be tendering for the first half of the day. Yep, that makes it 5 to 4 tenders, but we will be moving into that dock at about 2 or 3 this afternoon, so I'll be getting off via tender and then getting on probably via the port, which will be an interesting experience in and of itself. In any event, we are not quite here, but just about. And at this point, the place is recognizable to those that haven't been here, like myself. Up until now, it's just been one great big sprawl of a city. See everything behind us and how much of it there is. And how little of it we'll actually get to see. It's almost intimidating in that respect. Well, honey, we seem to be stopped. Presumably we're officially docked in Syndey Harbour. We're presumably waiting for the authorities to give us the okay, and then they'll be releasing the tenders and heading out into the city. I don't leave for another couple of hours because that's when my excursion, such as it is, takes off. But at least everything is arranged and ready to go. So I'm going to try and get this sent out, and hopefully I'll have more to tell you about as we go through the place. Until then, take care. Keep an eye on me, honey. Wish me luck.